If jealousy looks like love, if control sounds like care, and if violence gets explained away as culture or society, then we need to talk. Gender-based violence doesn't come out of nowhere. It's taught, reinforced, and normalized in families, schools, churches, and relationships. In this episode of Intersectional Psychology, we explore how patriarchy shapes masculinity, trains women to tolerate harm, and turns trauma into tradition, and what actually works to stop it. Because gender-based violence isn't inevitable, it's learned, and anything learned can be unlearned. I'm Aurora, and this is Intersectional Psychology. Stick around. Aurora Brown and Intersectional Psychology acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of country throughout South Africa and their connections to land, water, and community. We pay our respects to their elders past and present, and extend that respect to all Indigenous people listening today. Intersectional Psychology, Season 6, Gender Under Pressure, Episode 4, Femicide Nation, The Psychology of Gender-Based Violence. Hello, I'm your host Aurora Brown. I'm a registered counsellor in Cape Town, South Africa. Let's start with an uncomfortable truth. Gender-based violence isn't a glitch in society. It's a feature. And nowhere is that more painfully clear than in South Africa, where gender-based violence is not just widespread, it's normalized, minimized, rationalized, and far too often quietly tolerated. According to the National GBV Study 2022, conducted by the Human Sciences Research Council, the HSRC, more than 35% of South African women aged 18 and older have experienced physical or sexual violence in their lifetime. In the majority of these cases, the perpetrator was an intimate partner. In November 2025, the government invoked the Disaster Management Act to classify gender-based violence and femicide as a national disaster. But this action didn't originate with the government. On the 21st of November 2025, thousands of women, girls, and supporters, all dressed in black, lay down in a coordinated, silent protest, transforming South African pavements, university campuses, schoolyards, and beachfronts into sites of mourning and demonstration. This 15-minute protest honored the estimated 15 women who are killed every day in South Africa, one of the highest femicide rates in the world. The protest was organized by Women for Change and deliberately timed for the eve of the G20 summit in Johannesburg. The message was simple and devastating. You cannot talk about economic growth while women are living in constant fear. Participants were asked to withdraw from both paid and unpaid labor, to show just how much women and LGBTQIA+ people contribute to both society and the economy. As the official statement from Women for Change put it, Before the G20 meets to talk about growth and progress, South African women will show them what happens when we disappear. More than 1.1 million people worldwide signed the accompanying petition calling for gender-based violence and femicide to be declared a national disaster. And the numbers make it clear why. Intimate partner femicide in South Africa is almost 5 times the global average. In just 3 months last year, nearly 1,000 women were murdered. Thousands more survived attempted murder or suffered severe bodily harm. Over 10,000 rapes were reported to police, while an estimated 95% of cases are never reported at all. This isn't a crisis on the margins. This is the landscape women are navigating every single day. So today I want to talk about how patriarchy functions as the operating system behind domestic and gender-based violence, how it gets taught early, reinforced daily, and defended culturally, and why fixing individual behavior without dismantling the system is like putting a plaster on a broken femur. This episode is going to move between psychology, culture, history, and power, because gender-based violence doesn't live in just one of those dimensions. It lives in all of them at once. Patriarchy, not just an individual problem. Let's define patriarchy properly, because if we don't, we end up fighting straw men instead of systems. Patriarchy is a social system that normalizes male dominance and frames the subordination of women and people of other marginalized genders as natural, inevitable, or even loving. It tells men they must be providers, emotionally contained, dominant, in control. And it tells women they must be accommodating, nurturing, grateful, and quiet about their needs. Now, here's the psychological problem. When identity is built on dominance, losing power feels like annihilation. This directly leads to GBV, as male-perpetrated violence is seen as a fulfillment of a man's dominance and strength. So what happens when a woman earns more than her male partner, or asserts independence, or simply refuses to be controlled? For many men socialized under patriarchy, this doesn't feel like equality. It feels like shame, guilt, and inadequacy. It threatens their idea of their role as providers, the ideas that they've been taught. In short, it feels like humiliation. And humiliation, unresolved, very often turns into violence. Violence becomes a way of saying, I'm still in charge. That's not a personality flaw. That's a system doing exactly what it was designed to do. And this ideology has paradoxically led to women being left responsible, emotionally and often economically, for themselves and everyone else in the household. How violence, how violence gets normalized early. South Africa doesn't just have high rates of domestic violence and femicide. We have deeply ingrained cultural scripts that teach people to misread violence as care. We teach girls very early that their value is relational. Who wants you? Who chose you? Who finds you attractive? We police girls' bodies in schools, sometimes even forcing them to wear skirts in the depth of winter, while pretending this has nothing to do with male entitlement. And when boys hurt girls, we laugh and say, "Oh, he just likes you. He's teasing." No. He's learning that harm is an acceptable way to express desire. Then we reinforce it again when we tell children that being hit is discipline, that pain is love, that fear produces respect. Fast forward to adulthood, and suddenly jealousy is reframed as devotion. Control is called concern. Surveillance is called protection. Men are taught that women will, quote, play hard to get, unquote, and that they should break down a woman's resolve through coercive control. And when violence finally does show its face, families close ranks. Communities put pressure on the victim to remain silent. Even the police may discourage them from reporting. Not because no one knows it's wrong, but because patriarchy depends on women absorbing harm quietly to maintain the status quo. Boys will be boys and other dangerous myths. Patriarchy survives through stereotypes dressed up as biology. There are archaic ideas about natural differences between men and women, including their interests, emotions, and behaviors. Men are naturally aggressive. Women are, quote unquote, inherently accommodating. Leadership looks masculine. Submission looks feminine. Think about how gay couples are treated. They are regularly asked who's the man and who's the woman in the relationship, meaning who's the top and who's the bottom. Very binary thinking. Because straight men see being a bottom as more shameful, because bottoms are assumed to be weaker, more feminine, and more submissive due to their perceived proximity to women. And when women, or bottoms, violate those scripts by being assertive, ambitious, and loud, they're punished socially or physically and called difficult, dramatic, or attention-seeking. Children are rewarded for certain behaviors, such as playing with gender-typical toys, being tough for boys, or ladylike for girls. These ideas influence how we think about gender and how we think about inequalities. When men are violent and we write it off as boys will be boys, we link toxic and criminal adult behavior to childhood gender norms. Language does a lot of the dirty work here. Think about the discourse around the victims of Jeffrey Epstein's network of pedophiles. We speak about women as consumable, replaceable, responsible for the behavior of men. Even in death, women are interrogated. What was she wearing? Why was she out? Why didn't she leave? Notice how rarely the question is, why did he choose violence? And of course, stereotypically attractive victims get more sympathy and media attention. Teaching children that women should be kind, soft, patient, and forgiving communicates that those are not manly qualities, and therefore leaves women open to abuse and exploitation. Control often shows up long before the bruises do. He checks her phone. He monitors her money. He restricts her movements. He isolates her and discourages her friendships. Many women comply not because they agree with the situation, but because compliance feels safer than resistance. And that's obviously not consent. That's survival. Intersectionality. Violence has a history. Now we need to zoom out because patriarchy doesn't operate in a vacuum. In South Africa, race, class, and historical violence deeply shape how domestic violence plays out. Apartheid normalized brutality as governance. Violence was how the state maintained order. Those patterns didn't disappear in 1994, they mutated. Wealth and socioeconomic power are still distributed along racial lines, and trauma and prejudiced attitudes are passed down intergenerationally, simmering under the surface and expressed covertly. Men, particularly low-income men, are still humiliated in workplaces, stripped of dignity by economic inequality, and then expected to perform dominance at home. That doesn't excuse violence, but it does explain its transmission. Add to this absent fathers due to unjust labor systems, untreated depression, substance use as coping, and you get households where violence feels familiar, even inevitable. Cultural practices complicate this further. Ilobolo and dowries, for example, are often excused as tradition, but in practice they can reinforce ownership narratives that trap women in abusive marriages under the weight of family obligation and shame. Purity culture does the same work in Christianity and other religions. Virginity becomes currency. Women become investments. In order to maintain harmony and safety in their relationship, many women therefore normalize men's controlling behaviors, or develop coping strategies to mediate the power dynamics in their relationships. And leaving becomes not just dangerous, but dishonorable. What violence does to people. Gender-based violence doesn't just hurt individuals, It reshapes the entire ecosystem of society, affecting survivors, their families, and their communities. Psychologically, it leads to depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress, learned helplessness. Socially, it leads to isolation, stigma, loss of community support. And economically, it results in disrupted careers, financial dependence, homelessness. Children raised in violent homes don't just witness violence, they internalize it. It becomes part of their relational blueprint. And in adulthood, they react to survival situations that might not exist anymore. And when pain has no language, substances often step in. But maladaptive coping strategies like alcohol and drug dependence exacerbate violent tendencies. Violence begets violence, and silence compounds and multiplies the harm. What actually works? Here's the hopeful part, because yes, there is hope. Research consistently shows that community-driven interventions work better than individualized ones. Why? Because patriarchy is collective, and so resistance must be too. Community-based approaches address the entrenched cultural norms and support the individuals targeted by the interventions. The most effective programs run for longer periods, that is 2 years or more. They involve the whole community, combine social, psychological, and economic empowerment. Economic empowerment alone can backfire, especially if men aren't included in the conversation. When masculinity is threatened without being reimagined, violence can escalate. But when men are engaged, separately and safely, in learning new models of masculinity, then caregiving increases and violence decreases. Psychological empowerment programs matter enormously here. Research shows them to be effective for managing GBV-related symptoms like depression, anxiety, and post-traumatic stress, as well as improving resilience and reducing future victimization. They're accessible, they're scalable, they help people metabolize trauma instead of passing it on. Think community-based workshops, community mobilization, and school interventions. School-based programs are especially powerful. They can take advantage of the existing communication and networking structures to engage students, teachers, parents, and the community. Adolescence is a critical window. Challenge the script early, and you change the ending. Dismantling patriarchy is prevention. If we're serious about ending gender-based violence, we need to stop treating it as an emergency after it happens, and start treating patriarchy as the preventable condition it is. That means housing, and safety for survivors. It means education that addresses the systemic roots of violence must be embedded in schools and healthcare. Engaging men proactively with training in non-violent conflict resolution and healthy models of masculinity, like the work done by Sonke Gender Justice. Partnering with cultural and religious leaders, enforcing laws consistently, training police properly, and funding African-led research. Classifying GBV as a national disaster strengthens the mandates of the respective government departments, such as social development, justice, health, police, and basic education, to tackle gender-based violence and femicide. Previously, South Africa has used this legislation to respond to natural and public health emergencies like droughts, floods, and the COVID-19 pandemic. The classification will allow for expanded access to shelters, safe spaces, psychosocial counseling, and community-based prevention programs. It will enable faster emergency resource allocation for survivor services, enhanced monitoring and reporting mechanisms, and strengthen oversight. All affected organs of state will be required to submit progress reports to the National Disaster Management Center on the actions they are taking. As President Cyril Ramaphosa explained, we must engage honestly about the toxic masculinity, cultural norms, peer pressure, social dynamics, and socialization that is turning men and boys into abusers of women and children. And yet, now, more than 4 months after declaring it a national disaster, the government has still not taken any action to reduce GBV in South Africa. Declaring GBV a state of emergency wasn't radical, but ignoring it is. Dineo once said that rape is a language, and South African society has become fluent in it. So fluent, in fact, that we often can't tell where harm begins and normality ends. Consent, real, enthusiastic consent, is still a foreign language in many of our classrooms, homes, and relationships. If patriarchy taught us this language of violence, then unlearning it requires intention, courage, and collective effort. We don't need better victims. We need better systems. And we need to start speaking a new language together. In this week's bonus segment, we're going inside the nervous system. What does chronic coercive control do to attachment? Why does intermittent affection make leaving harder? And why is the most dangerous time often the moment a woman tries to escape? We'll also talk about whether policy and policing can solve gender-based violence, or whether we're avoiding deeper cultural change. It's a difficult conversation and a necessary one. after sitting with gender-based violence, it's tempting to look for simple explanations or clear villains. But social life is rarely that tidy. In the next episode, we'll turn to religion, a powerful force that has been used both to justify harm and to resist it. We'll explore how faith can shape ideas of justice, dignity, and care, and why any serious analysis of gender in South Africa has to take religion seriously, even when it makes us uncomfortable. That's next time in this series on intersectional psychology. Until then, remember, everyone has the right to live with their optimal mental health. Thank you for listening to Intersectional Psychology. Please follow or subscribe to the podcast to get every episode. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate and review Intersectional Psychology in your preferred app. It really helps other people find the podcast. This episode of Intersectional Psychology was researched, written, recorded, and edited by me, Aurora Brown. For a transcript of this episode, please see the link in the show notes on your podcast app or go to intersectionalpsychology.com. You can also check the website or the show notes for a full list of references for this episode. A video of this episode with closed captions is available on youtube.com/@intersectionalpsychology. To support this podcast and get access to bonus content, including additional episodes and interviews, as well as more guided mindfulness sessions, please go to patreon.com/intersectionalpsychology. You can also chat with me on Blue Sky at intersectpsy.bsky.social and Instagram, Facebook, or TikTok at Intersectional Psychology. But mostly Blue Sky. Aurora Brown and Intersectional Psychology are committed to the Sight Black Women praxis. All episodes of Intersectional Psychology are for educational purposes only and are not intended to be a substitute for professional mental health advice, diagnosis, or treatment. I, Aurora Brown, am not able to answer specific questions about individual situations. Always seek the advice of your health provider with any questions you may have regarding a mental health condition. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard or seen on this podcast. If you think you need immediate assistance, please call your local emergency number or any mental health crisis hotline. Everyone deserves good mental health.